beberapa laporan media dan juga dalam media sosial hebat diperkatakan dan hangat diperkatakan tentang kesan daripada ada sedikit salah faham tentang cukai tersebut. Sebenarnya ia pertama kali dibangkitkan dalam Belanjawan 2022 ya, dan asalnya sepatutnya mula dilaksana pada April tahun ini. Tapi kerajaan telah putuskan akan dilaksana bermula 1 Januari 2024 dan terpakai untuk produk-produk yang diimport dari luar negara bernilai RM500 ke bawah. Ya, jadi antara lain ini untuk tingkatkan daya saing produk-produk tempatan dan tidak ada kesan kepada produk-produk dalam negara kita ya, yang dibeli secara dalam talian. Jadi yang penting untuk dijelaskan, ia hanya terpakai untuk produk-produk yang diimport dari luar negara yang dijual secara dalam talian di Malaysia. Produk-produk dalam negara yang dihasilkan di Malaysia tidak terkesan dengan cukai ini. Jadi saya harap ini dapat mengurangkan salah faham di kalangan masyarakat tentang cukai tersebut. Apapun kita boleh rujuk ke laman rasmi Jabatan Kastam untuk maklumat yang lebih terperinci. Dan dari semasa ke semasa kita akan pantau untuk pastikan adakah rakyat terutama para penjual dan pembeli yang kita tahu sekarang ni banyak transaksi dalam talian, adakah mereka benar-benar faham kenapa cukai ini dilaksanakan dan sama ada apa kategori produk ya yang terkesan. Sebagai contoh, saya difahamkan beberapa produk rokok dan tembakau ya, pihak kastam telah mengecualikan atas sebab-sebab tertentu. Tapi kita lihat memang produk tembakau pun ada dikenakan cukai ya, jadi itu kita serah kepada Jabatan Kastam.
Baik, Saudara Presiden, untuk mengulas lanjut mengenai perkara ini adalah pengasas bersama Industri Unite, Datuk David Gurupatam. Apa khabar, Datuk?
Khabar baik. How are you? Good morning.
Good morning. Okey, mungkin pertama sekali kita nak tahu 10% ni dikenakan kepada peniaga terhadap LVJ, tapi kita nak tahu juga bagaimana di peringkat pembeli atau pengguna ataupun platform e-dagang ketika ini. Jadi apakah langkah yang boleh kita ambil untuk tentukan ataupun mengenal pasti jumlah cukai ini dikenakan kepada mereka bagaimana? Adakah di platform ataupun peniaga? Jadi bagaimana? Bantu kita faham, Datuk.
So sebenarnya saya percaya platform ini sepatutnya register dengan Jabatan Kastam ya, melalui satu skim di mana pembayaran akan dibuat directly daripada platform ini atau peniaga ini kepada kastam. Dan ini walaupun peniaga di Malaysia, tetapi walaupun kontrak penjualan di Malaysia, tetapi kalau barang itu sampai dari luar negeri, maka cukai ini dikenakan.
Bagaimana pula dengan cukai ini mempengaruhi harga pembelian dan talian? Adakah industri secara dalam keseluruhan akan terkesan?
Sebenarnya tidak. Sebenarnya bagi pihak industri di Malaysia lah, kami sokong perkara ini. Kami sokong perkara ini kerana adanya satu unfair advantage kepada penjual dari luar negeri ataupun bila local producers membawa barang dari luar negeri. Ini adalah kerana pengeluar atau penjual dari dalam negeri ini, dia dah kena cukai. Tetapi kalau bawa barang dari luar negeri, maka dia lebih murah. Maksud dia orang akan beli dari luar, daripada luar negeri, daripada membeli dari local sellers lah. Itu yang paling penting. Yang keduanya, kita mesti ingat bahawa local seller ni, dia kalau dia beli satu jenama barangan macam pen ke apa yang dia kena bayar rights dan sebagainya lah untuk menjual barang itu di Malaysia. Tetapi kalau dia kita tak tahu, mungkin dia tak bayar benda tu lebih. Oleh yang demikian, ini adalah satu teks yang disokong oleh masyarakat SME lah. Hello?
Okey, Datuk boleh continue?
Ya. So dalam keadaan ini, bagi kita, bagi peniaga di Malaysia, ini adalah satu yang baik kerana ia memberi satu orang kata level playing field di mana kita boleh menyaing. Sebab dulu orang dari peniaga dari luar atau penjual dari luar akan memperkuatkan lagi penjual-penjual dan peniaga-peniaga di Malaysia. Yang kedua, sebagai makro, dia adalah baik untuk negara juga sebab kita ada dalam fiscal deficit kan, dan Prime Minister kita telah mengatakan bahawa mereka perlu mengurangkan fiscal deficit ini, dan kita sudah tahu kita sudah ada beberapa lagi jenis cukai yang sudah masuk, iaitu yang akan masuk, iaitu capital gains tax terhadap share lepas sesuai lain. Tapi sekarang kita ada ini tax untuk LVG lah. Tapi dalam keadaan ini LVG ni memang peniaga-peniaga dan SME sokong lah.
Dan bercakap mengenai pelaksanaannya pada 1 Januari, maksudnya berbaki kurang 2 minggu lagi lah. Kita nak tahu tentang dasar dan polisinya. Jadi bagaimana dasar dan polisi ketika ini dapat kita pastikan pematuhan terhadap cukai jualan atas LVG ini terutamanya online, ataupun kita perlu perhalusi lagi dari segi dasar dan polisi ini. Bagaimana Datuk?
Well, kalau kita lihat dasar dan polisi ini, so secara polisi sudah di test lah. Ini adalah satu perkara yang ada di luar negeri. Dan kita perlu juga ingat di negara seperti negara jiran kita di Singapura dan sebagainya, dia ada akan bertingkatkan lagi. Jadi polisi amnya satu yang dia akan pemantauannya itu adalah satu perkara lain lah. Dengan registration, dengan pendaftaran dengan Jabatan Custom melalui satu platform, dan juga pembayaran dan declaration lah. Ada satu proses declaration dan pembayaran. Saya silap. So dalam satu laman atau satu platform yang agak mudah lah, saya difahamkan.
Tapi perkara ini sebenarnya kalau kita tengok di media sosial, banyak sudah orang mengatakan tentang perkara ini, bagaimana mereka bimbang harga akan naik, sebab kita tahu ramai orang yang shopping online ni. Jadi bagaimana untuk kita melaksanakan secara orang kata kita perhalusi lah secara supaya orang ramai faham ini bukan hanya untuk kita menguntungkan peniaga untuk menaikkan harga semata-mata. Jadi kita nak tahu apa kepentingan dan bagaimana kita untuk melaksanakan supaya orang faham ini penting untuk ekonomi e-dagang.
Sememangnya kalau kita lihat harga yang kita selalu katakan harga naik itu selalunya essential goods. Essential goods, saya kata essential goods tu apa? Macam memang essential goods ni dari di dalam negeri. Jadi kalau orang kata price hike ni, I don't think so lah. Sebab orang naik, maksudnya kalau satu pen mungkin kamu kalian dari luar negeri. Ini adalah kerana dia tak bayar teks, penjual dari luar negeri tak bayar teks, dan dia mungkin tak bayar tinggi dan IT sebagai. Tapi kalau di Malaysia, benda tu masih ada. So saya tak rasalah dia akan ada spike atau secara keseluruhan ada satu impact kepada itu.
Datuk, apa lagi aspek yang perlu kita beri tumpuan untuk terhadap cukai jualan ini bergerak ke hadapan, dan apa persediaan yang perlu kita lakukan oleh peniaga terutamanya?
Peniaga mesti mempermudahkanlah. Maksud dia, kalau orang nak beli dari dalam talian, mereka patut diberi peluang kerana mungkin ada lebih choice dan sebagainya. Kalau nak beli satu beg, mungkin di Malaysia ada 2-3 saja variety dia. Tapi di luar.
Jadi baik, banyak lagi yang kita nak bincangkan sebenarnya, tapi kita punya line tak mengizinkan. Jadi kita akan berhenti rehat seketika, kembali selepas ini.
Nak tak gaming room ke orang beli? Tapi ada satu syarat. Kejayaan mereka semakin hampir.
Kalau kita menang next round, kita dapat pergi gaming house lagi.
Tas anda akan bermula. Korang tahu tak kenapa korang asyik kalah je selama ni?
Buat apa? Role dulu yang korang pernah main pun. Kita pernah menang ke?
Muka biar buruk, tak apa. Gamers Mangkuk stream episod baru setiap Jumaat on demand dan Astro Premier.
Perkembangan situasi semasa.
Wujud kenaikan harga ayam
memang berlaku di tempat-tempat tertentu.
Kementerian Sumber Manusia akan menjalankan operasi di seluruh negara.
Kita mahu menghindari unsur-unsur buruh paksa di negara kita.
Berkenaan aspek kawasannya di TikTok Shop.
Rumuskan dan kita kumpulkan apa tindakan pihak kerajaan.
sudah tahu salah namun tetap berdegil.
Hamba boleh tengok semua channel Astro. Astro First pun ada.
Hanya di AWANI 745.
Rizal Persekutuan Amerika Syarikat telah mengekalkan kadar faedah pada 5.25 hingga 5.50% susulan daripada mesyuarat terbaharunya untuk kali ketiga berturut-turut dengan penurunan inflasi sepanjang tahun lalu. Jawatan Kuasa Pasaran Terbuka Persekutuan FOMC yang diketuai oleh Pengerusi Fed Jerome Powell juga meramalkan pemotongan kadar faedah pada tahun hadapan. Dan kita nak melihat kepada perkembangan ekonomi di luar negeri ini, bagaimana keputusan FOMC akan mempengaruhi OPR dan nilai ringgit Malaysia. Dan sudah bersedia untuk mengulas lebih lanjut adalah Ketua Ekonomi dan Kewangan Sosial Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad, Dr. Muhammad Afzal Nizam Abdul Rashid. Doktor, melihat kepada perkembangan ekonomi di luar negeri, Fed di Amerika Syarikat telah memutuskan untuk kekalkan kadar faedahnya pada paras yang tinggi walaupun terdapat tanda-tanda keadaan ekonomi yang lebih perlahan. Jadi kita nak tahu, adakah Fed memberi gambaran ekonomi Amerika Syarikat masih mampan walaupun sepatutnya kos pinjaman yang tinggi akan menyebabkan ekonomi di sana terus perlahan bagi tempoh akan datang. Bagaimana, Doktor?
Baik Nabilah, sebenarnya kalau kita lihat naratif yang cuba dipaparkan oleh pihak Fed adalah mereka mampu untuk mengendalikan ekonomi negara mereka, iaitu untuk mencapai satu tahap apa yang dipanggil sebagai soft landing lah. Maksudnya pertumbuhan ekonomi yang lebih stabil dan sedikit perlahan, kerana sebelum ini terdapat banyak cakap-cakap ataupun terdapat beberapa persoalan adakah negara Amerika Syarikat bakal mengalami suatu bentuk apa yang dikatakan sebagai kemelisan ekonomi lah. Jadi saya melihat sidang akhbar setelah keputusan FOMC telah dijalankan, ada soalan ditanya berkenaan dengan kemelisan ekonomi, namun walaupun situasi itu tidak ditolak 100%, namun mereka meletakkan suatu kebarangkalian yang rendah lah untuk kemelisan ekonomi Amerika Syarikat untuk berlaku. Jadi di sini saya rasa naratif ini menunjukkan bahawa walaupun peningkatan kadar faedah begitu drastik daripada 0.25% sehingga ke paras 5.5% dalam tempoh sekitar setahun lebih, namun mereka menyatakan bahawa mereka mampu untuk menjadikan ekonomi Amerika Syarikat kekal stabil. Jadi itu naratif yang cuba dipamerkan. Namun mungkin pihak pasaran kewangan mungkin mempunyai pendapat yang atau mempunyai pendirian berbeza. Jadi ini bergantung kepada apakah data-data yang bakal kita lihat pada masa akan datang.
Doktor, ekonomi di Amerika Syarikat diujar berkembang lebih perlahan. Jadi Malaysia sudah tentu akan terkesan kalau kita ambil kira Amerika Syarikat sebagai salah satu rakan dagang utama yang juga merupakan pasaran utama bagi E&E, elektronik dan elektronik yang dikilangkan di Malaysia. Jadi bagaimana doktor melihat perkara ini?
Secara umumnya kalau kita melihat hubung kait antara keluaran dalam negara kasar Amerika Syarikat dan Malaysia, ia mempunyai suatu hubungan yang positif, dia mempunyai hubungan yang sangat rapat, iaitu sekitar 70%. Ini bererti suatu perhubungan yang positif. Maksudnya kalau ekonomi Amerika Syarikat meningkat secara positif, kita pun akan meningkat dalam kadar yang lebih kurang sama. Jadi kalau trajektorinya makin perlahan, maka kita pun mengalami suatu kemungkinan untuk mengalami suatu bentuk pertumbuhan yang lebih perlahan. Jadi berbekalkan dapatan kajian seperti sedemikian rupa, maka memang kita akan sentiasa memantau kesihatan ekonomi Amerika Syarikat lah, dan di sini kita melihat dasar yang bakal dijalankan oleh pihak Fed sangat-sangat penting, dan apa yang telah dikongsi adalah mereka sedang bersedia untuk mengurangkan kadar faedah pada masa akan datang. Ini bererti mereka sedang cuba sedang upaya untuk memastikan dasar monetary mereka bentuk momentum pertumbuhan yang positif lah pada masa akan datang. Jadi sepatutnya kalau naratif itu berjaya dilaksanakan, seharusnya ia akan memberi satu kesan yang stabil lah kepada ekonomi negara. Tapi ia bergantunglah kepada bagaimana ianya akan berevolusi pada tahun 2024 nanti.
Jadi mengambil kira situasi ekonomi di luar ni Amerika Syarikat, bagaimana pula keputusan Bank Negara nanti? Adakah OPR akan diturunkan juga pada tahun depan sejajar dengan keputusan yang bakal diputuskan Fed yang dijangka akan turunkan kadar faedahnya pada tahun hadapan?
Secara umumnya, Federal Reserve ni atau keputusan kadar faedah di peringkat Federal Reserve ni merupakan trendsetter lah di peringkat ekonomi global. Namun hakikatnya dari dalam konteks Bank Negara Malaysia, mereka akan melaksanakan dasar monetary berdasarkan pengamatan ekonomi domestik. Dan ini amat bergantung kepada dasar yang dijalankan, terutamanya dasar fiskal dan sebagainya. Adakah ia mampu untuk mencatatkan suatu pertumbuhan ekonomi yang baik pada masa akan datang. Namun disebabkan negara kita ni terlalu terbuka dari sudut perdagangan antarabangsa, terbuka dari sudut aliran modal asing, maka tidak kita akan Bank Negara akan juga memantau situasi ataupun prestasi ekonomi global. Jadi kita nak kata adakah Fed, jika Federal Reserve menurunkan kadar faedah, adakah Bank Negara juga akan menurunkan kadar faedah? Itu tidak semestinya berlaku, tapi ia bergantung kepada apakah impak ekonomi luaran kepada prestasi ekonomi negara. Jadi itu yang akan dipantau dan diamati oleh pihak Bank Negara sebelum mereka membuat satu keputusan kenaan dengan OPR.
Macam doktor katakan tadi, sebarang keputusan Fed dijangkakan terus beri kesan kepada pasaran kewangan, termasuk pergerakan mata wang negara. Jadi adakah jangkaan ringgit akan mengukuh ke paras 4.45 berbanding dolar pada penghujung tahun ini, dan mampukah ringgit mencatat pengukuhan pada tahun hadapan?
Okey, kalau kita lihat dari segi hubung kait antara US Dollar Index dan juga bagaimana ia memberi kesan pada nilai ringgit kita, ia mempunyai satu hubung kait yang rapat, dan US Dollar Index pula juga amat dipengaruhi oleh stand atau pendirian dasar monetary di Amerika Syarikat. Jadi memandangkan pihak Fed dijangka akan melonggarkan dasar monetary yang sedia ada ini agak ketat. Jadi kalau ke arah monetary easing tersebut, jadi saya kira akan merendahkan US Dollar Index, dan ini akan memberi kesan yang positif lah kepada nilai ringgit pada tahun 2024. Jadi itu dia punya hubung kait antara dasar monetary Amerika Syarikat, impact kepada US Dollar Index, dan akhirnya bagaimana ia diterjemahkan kepada nilai ringgit. Jadi jangkaan sekitar 4.5 ataupun 4.50 sen pada tahun hadapan, pada akhir tahun hadapan saya kira itu satu perkara yang boleh dicapai.
Tapi doktor, beberapa unjuran dibuat menyatakan bahawa Amerika Syarikat mungkin berdepan kemelesetan. Jadi apa pandangan doktor berkenaan perkara ini melihat kepada data seperti US yield spread dan data-data lain?
Ya, kalau kita lihat keluk yield curve ataupun pasaran bond masih lagi dalam keadaan dipanggil yield curve inversion, dan yield curve inversion ni maksudnya kadar pulangan yang short term melebihi kadar pulangan yang berperingkat jangka panjang. Jadi situasi ini sentiasanya dikaitkan tentang jangkaan kepada kemelesetan ekonomi. Namun ini hanyalah jangkaan, tapi apa yang oleh para peserta pasaran adalah melihat kepada prestasi ekonomi yang sebenarnya lah, maksudnya dari segi pasaran pekerjaan, dari segi sentimen perniagaan, dan akhirnya bagaimana KDNK Amerika Syarikat akan direncanakan pada tahun 2024. Jadi ini akan dipantaulah sama ada berlaku kemungkinan-kemungkinan seperti kemolesan dan bagaimana ianya berlaku bergantung kepada bagaimana ia melihat dari segi kenaikan kadar faedah yang lepas ni.
Jadi adakah ini akan beri impak yang besar kepada Malaysia dari segi pertumbuhan ekonomi dan mungkin soft landing di Amerika Syarikat? Bagaimana Doktor?
Seperti saya katakan tadi, dinamik ekonomi Malaysia ni sangat terbuka. Jadi sudah pasti segala bentuk perkembangan Amerika Syarikat ni akan dipantau dan perkara ini akan dibahas dan akan dibincangkan di peringkat negara saya, dan ini akan mencoraklah bagaimana dasar monetary itu akan ditadbir. Dan kita sedia maklum bahawa OPR pun telah dinaikkan daripada 1.75% sehingga ke paras 3%. Ini menggambarkan pihak bank negara telah pun mempunyai suatu ruang dasar untuk mereka bertindak pada masa akan datang. Jadi saya rasa kita berada dalam keadaan yang bersedialah untuk menghadapi sebarang bentuk kemungkinan.
Okey, melihat kepada prestasi perbelanjaan yang lebih sederhana dan sebaliknya pertumbuhan peningkatan yang lebih baik, apa yang boleh Doktor rumuskan mengenai prospek pertumbuhan ekonomi negara bagi tahun hadapan 2024? Adakah lebih perlahan atau lebih kuat berbanding tahun ini 2023 yang hanya berbaki 2 minggu saja lagi?
Betul. Saya menyangkakan pertumbuhan ekonomi kekal stabil dan ini amat bergantung kepada situasi permintaan domestik, dan di sini saya rasa peranan dasar fiskal itu sangat-sangat penting, terutamanya perbelanjaan pembangunan, dan apa yang telah dikongsi ketika Belanjawan 2024 dibentangkan, perbelanjaan pembangunan jangka mencatat ke paras 90 bilion, suatu angka yang tinggi. Jadi saya rasa ini merupakan suatu bentuk mangkin ataupun katalis yang penting untuk memastikan pertumbuhan ekonomi domestik itu akan kekal stabil dan mungkin boleh membuat satu offset kepada sebarang bentuk kelembapan ekonomi global. Jadi saya kira ini adalah satu perkara yang perlu ditekankan. Jadi maksudnya belanjawan 2024 itu perlu dilaksanakan segera mungkin, sebatas mungkin.
Tapi Doktor, mungkin yang terakhir, apa mungkin downside risk yang kita perlu beri perhatian untuk oleh Malaysia lah untuk tahun hadapan 2024?
Saya rasa memang tak lain tak bukan situasi ekonomi Amerika Syarikat, situasi ekonomi China juga perlu dipantau juga ya. Dan kemudian dari segi geopolitics, kita sedia maklum bahawa tahun hadapan beberapa orang kata tu election yang penting seperti pilihan raya di peringkat presiden di Amerika Syarikat juga perlu dipantau adakah ini akan merubah dari segi dasar Amerika Syarikat dan sebagainya. Itu antara perkara yang saya rasa perlu diambil kira lah pada tahun hadapan.
Baik, terima kasih diucapkan kepada Ketua Ekonomi dan Kewangan Sosial Bank Muamalat Malaysia Berhad, Dr. Muhammad Afzal Nizam Abdul Rashid. Kita akan teruskan dengan perkembangan GUSME. Inovasi sesuatu produk mampu menjadikan ia lebih unik dan menarik selain memberi kepelbagaian kepada pelanggan walaupun ia hanya sekadar kek kukus buah-buahan. Johor yang menjadi negeri pengeluar utama nanas menjadi cetusan ilham kepada usahawan dari Pontian untuk menawarkan keistimewaan dalam setiap suapan kek buah kukus berjenama Yasmin.
Umi Nur Adila Hasbullah menggunakan buah nanas yang dikeringkan sendiri sebagai percubaan mempelbagaikan pilihan pelanggan. Antara buah campuran kering yang sebelum ini digunakan hanya mengandungi kismis, kulit lemon dan buah ceri. Kek buah kukus yang dihasilkan mampu bertahan sehingga 5 bulan apabila ia dikukus selama 4 jam selain penjagaan air. Ujarnya, kek kukus buah tidak boleh terdedah dengan air, terutama wap air ketika proses mengukus.
Inovasi ni idea daripada Jabatan Pertanian Pontian. Diorang bimbing saya untuk pelbagaikan produk. Keluarkan perisa nanas. Diorang guide saya ajar macam mana nak halwakan nanas, mangga. Untuk yang terbaru ni kita ada nanas dengan mangga akan datang. InsyaAllah kita akan buat pelbagai perisa, kelapa, buah rozel, macam-macam lah boleh dihalwakan. Kita ada buat untuk hantaran perkahwinan, pertunangan, dekorasi hari jadi dan pelbagai lah. Door gift apa semua kita ada buat.
Mengulas berkenaan pemasaran digital, ibu dua anak ini telah menebusi pasaran Singapura menerusi platform Shopee, Facebook dan TikTok. Setiap bulan, 500 kg kek kukus buah mampu dijual, dihasilkan dan pernah mencecah 5,000 kg ketika musim perayaan.
Jadi bila kita try buat online, permintaan tinggi dan kita cuba untuk pelbagaikan saiz kek ni lah. Untuk pemasaran, kita telah keluarkan kek kita di dalam dan juga di luar negara. Macam di luar negara, kita telah supply di Singapura lah melalui ejen dan juga stokis. Maka dalam negara, kita ada ejen-ejen setiap negeri. Sebagai contoh, kita ada Perak, KL dan juga kawasan sinilah. Selain itu, kita ada letak dekat Petronas dan juga kawasan-kawasan kedai-kedai vendor. Untuk perancangan akan datang, kita akan mula untuk join e-commercial punya kempen lah. Sebab kita mungkin akan fokus pada online lah. Sebab online ni cepat sikit berbanding offline.
Sama seperti peniaga lain, risiko kek tidak menjadi juga pernah dialami perusahaan kecil ini. Dia terpaksa melupuskan 140 kg kek kukusnya kerana bantat akibat masalah pengukus. Walaupun baru dalam bidang pembuatan kek kukus, mereka berjaya meraih bantuan daripada Jabatan Pertanian dan Perbadanan Usahawan Johor seperti bantuan peralatan pengadun, mesin kukus dan bengkel.
Terokai keindahan pulau, tarikan pelancongan dan kehidupan penduduk setempat dalam island checkpoints yang dibawakan khas oleh Tourism Malaysia.
Ada kick dia. Jom kita pergi tengok. Dia main turun je, tak cilah kan?
Macam-macam lagi lah.
Bau dia.
Ni bubur kuning, boyak garam.
Experience yang baru, kami. Memang cantik.
Setiap Sabtu, 8.30 malam di semua platform Astro AWANI.
Demas Singa Malaysia pasti mengujakan anda. Alami keajaibannya disertai bintang-bintang misteri dan karakter-karakter melangkaui imajinasi. Penuh warna-warni menanti anda untuk diterokai. Siapa di sebalik topeng? Demas Singa Malaysia musim keempat secara langsung di Astro Warna dan Astro Go.
Welcome back to Niaga AWANI. In anticipation of 2024 forecast, starting today onwards, we are going to have a comprehensive discussions on various industries in Malaysia under the insightful segment of Niaga AWANI forecast. Last year, the Malaysian economy experienced a robust resurgence, rebounding from the pandemic-induced downturn. The GDP growth rate reached an impressive 8.7%, the highest in 22 years. This resurgence was propelled by the reopening of economic activities and resilient export performance, and the digital economy stands as one of the fastest growing sectors in Malaysia. The Malaysian telecommunications market has exhibited a consistent growth pattern and subsequent stabilization of average revenue per user or ARPU levels across the sector. Given these trends, telcos are in a prime position to boost their earnings by taking practical steps like expanding fiber broadband coverage. So to discuss further, we have on the line is founder and CEO of Twimbit, Manoj Menon. Good morning.
Hey, good morning there, Nabilah.
All right, what significant achievements and milestones have marked the landscape of telecommunications industry in this year, 2023, and how do these accomplishments reflect the dynamic evolution of telco companies throughout the year?
Correct. The telecom industry, as you know, is relatively mature in its growth cycle. So the growth rate has been relatively low, particularly in Malaysia. It has been in the low single digit, and that's partly because of intense competition, keeping prices fairly stable. The big growth opportunity is to actually grow the enterprise business. Moving forward, even in 2023, as well as moving forward, the big opportunity is how can the telcos grow the enterprise business. That means serving the large enterprise customers as well as small and medium businesses. These companies are looking at services which are like cloud services, 5G services, and these services are likely to be much of the growth engine moving forward for the telecommunications industry.
Looking at the research findings, it's evident that the substantial majority of 36 out of 42 telcos achieved positive year-over-year revenue growth in the second quarter of this year. So can you shed light on the specific regions that emerged as primary beneficiaries of this growth, and what factors contributed to their remarkable success in the telecommunication sector?
Yeah, good point, Nabilah. The fastest growing telcos have been in India. The likes of Bharti Airtel, Jio have seen some good growth because they adjusted their tariffs. Price competition was very high in the Indian market. There was some rationalization last year and this year. And because of that adjustment in pricing, the telcos have seen some good growth. Other telcos in other countries like China Mobile have grown well because they have all focused on growing the enterprise part of the business. As a result, they have enjoyed some good growth. They have been the first to deploy, among the first in the region and the world to deploy 5G services. They have created many use cases of deployment of 5G services to help drive industry transformation, and that has helped them drive the growth. So these are the two critical factors that have seen the growth research in 2023 for telcos, both in the region, and similar trends are seen in Malaysia as well.
Manoj, one of the key insights that I can see is the dominance of top telcos, including Telekom Malaysia, Maxis and Celcom DG, accounting for around 90% of 2022's revenue, underscores their strategic positioning. So can you elaborate on the key factors contributing to their market leadership?
Malaysia has been an exciting market. Firstly, we saw the merger between Celcom and DG. That consolidation has helped improve the EBITDA performance now of the consolidated entity in this year. So overall, consolidation is good because you need huge amounts of investments to be able to propel the industry forward. Now, these three companies we talked about, between them, they account for really bulk of the overall industry revenues. All the three companies are now, they see the avenue to invest and grow new services, be it in the form of enterprise connectivity, advanced services like cloud, security services. We have also seen some early deployments of 5G services, particularly in oil and gas. Companies like Petronas have deployed some good solutions. And we take this momentum moving forward into 2020. I recently visited the Digital National Berhad Experience Center, where they showcased over 50 different use cases of 5G. So the market is slowly, the ecosystem is coming together, and slowly I think these are the things that will contribute immensely to the growth of the industry moving forward.
Building on the positive momentum observed in the second quarter of this year, what strategic measures can telco companies adopt to sustain and further enhance their upward trajectory, especially considering the pivotal role of focus areas such as fiber broadband, 5G implementation, digital initiatives, and strategic approaches targeting the enterprise sector?
Yeah, one of the critical requirements to succeed moving forward is the completeness of the ecosystem. The biggest growth is not in connectivity. The biggest growth is in the advanced services. Is how can telcos like Telekom Malaysia put together comprehensive solutions to enable the transformation of the industry or transformation of government. To put these solutions together means you need a completeness of ecosystem. We need to bring together different participants. You need the global hyperscalers like the Google and Microsoft and Amazon coming together. You need local companies, people who are driving innovation in areas. So, for example, companies like AWANI, which are doing a lot of work around the drone. And then these applications need to be applied to specific vertical industries. The industries being oil and gas or agriculture, or the large manufacturing organizations which can use these technologies together. So to be successful, telcos need to be the orchestrators. While they serve enterprise customers, they need to do better in serving this ecosystem really well. if they can serve the ecosystem well, automatically they will be the biggest beneficiaries of the research and growth in the economy and the use of these advanced services as we get into 2024.
All right, Manoj, in the context of Malaysia's rapid growth economy, it is expected to maintain a robust 4 to 5% compound annual growth rate from 2023 to 2027. So what specific steps can the nation undertake to not just strengthen but enhance its telecommunications industry?
Yeah, see, relatively our per capita consumption of internet and advanced services like cloud, etc., is still quite low as compared to the very mature countries. Let's take the example of specific services like cloud services. Overall, the penetration of cloud services is still relatively small, and therefore, if we can try and if the government and if the initiatives can be taken to say how do we make sure that we advance these services, we consume these services in a safe and secure manner, that will be a powerful opportunity to drive the growth. Both all the hyperscalers, AWS, Google and Microsoft are looking at making their services available locally. That should allay many of the fears, particularly data residency that have existed, which have slowed the overall adoption. So I think that's one critical pillar to move towards. How do we make sure that these services can be consumed and grow? The second is we need to grow our digital talent. We need to have enough capabilities, particularly in areas such as AI and data, so that the businesses can leverage on these talent to be able to transform their businesses adequately. We are hoping that the continued investments in building the talent serve not just the local telecommunications industry, but also enable the positioning of Malaysia as a regional hub to serve the widespread demand that exists for these advanced technologies across the Asian markets.
All right, as we look ahead to 2024, we have about 2 weeks left. Could you provide insights into the anticipated outlook and trends shaping the telecommunications landscape?
Yeah, so I believe, we have seen some consolidation take place in 2023. In 2024, we expect, the full measures and the benefits of some of this consolidation be realized by companies like Celcom-G 2024. So we should see overall some improvement in the performance of the telco. We also see that competition is relatively low, and therefore, there will be less pressure on the pricing moving forward. The second area, almost all the telcos are expected to make significant investments and grow their capabilities in taking the enterprise services to market. I believe government is a huge opportunity. The government transformation, particularly leveraging IT technologies, we have seen some stability in the government this year. We believe significant amount of those investments will come into play as we get into next year. And the telcos are well poised, given the nature of their strategic positioning and alignment with the government's goals, to be able to support the digitization efforts of the government, the ability to adopt, cloud services. So the telcos are adequately well positioned as they get into next year to be able to do it. The key is, they need to be able to execute on these opportunities exist. As they compete, telecom is converging with other IT industries as well. So competition is not just from telcos. Competition for new businesses are from the large IT service firms, be it local or global, and it's the ability to have those capabilities developed that will determine their ability to succeed and keep driving growth for their respective businesses.
All right, Manoj, briefly, we have about 1 minute left. How do all these projections align with key industry players and the overarching goals of advancing technologies such as fiber broadband, 5G and digital initiatives, as well as capitalizing on government initiatives aimed at fostering affordable services with a projected 3.7% CAGR, reaching approximately $10.6 billion by 2027?
Yeah, I'm quite optimistic that as we get into 2024, we will see a decent growth in the industry. We have had Celcom-Digi coming out of the merger, they are a refreshed entity. Telekom Malaysia now today has a new CEO, and that is a change, and I'm sure he will bring his new vision and enthusiasm in trying to drive the performance moving forward. So as we look into 2024, I'm quite optimistic about the potential of the industry to leverage on the big transition. I believe 2024 will be a year of public cloud significant growth and adoption, and that itself will be a key driver. And the second driver is 5G services. All the major telcos have signed that definitive agreement with DNB. So the convergence of the cloud availability in Malaysia, along with the increased emphasis on 5G, these 2 points coming together will be the biggest driver and growth engine for Malaysian telecom industry in 2024.
All right, that was an insightful discussion on APAC region telco industry performance in 2023 and also forecast for next year 2024. So thank you, founder and CEO of Twimbit, Manoj Menon.
Ada daripada kita yang sentiasa menyinari hidup yang lain. Ada daripada kita yang hulurkan tangan, berikan masa. Ada daripada kita yang sentiasa turut serta. Walau berbeza, kita duduk semeja. Tiada jurang antara kita. Kongsi rezeki bersama. Kongsi idea. Kita raikan perbezaan. Sematkan kesatuan. Kita menggerakkan negara ke puncak dunia.
Baik, ringgit dijangka diniagakan tinggi minggu ini susulan impak positif daripada pakej rangsangan domestik terbaru China dan pendirian dasar oleh Rizab Persekutuan Amerika Syarikat berkaitan kadar faedahnya. Rakan pengurusan SPI Asset Management Stephen Ines berkata, langkah China itu selari dengan komitmennya untuk menyokong sektor hartanah dengan menyediakan rangsangan yang lebih kukuh kepada para pelabur. Jadi kita ingin melihat bagaimana pergerakan ringgit untuk setakat hari ini 18 Disember 2023 dan setakat jam, kalau saya tekan sini, kalau setakat jam 9.49 ia berada pada paras 4.6786 dan kalau ini kalau kita dapat lihat dalam sekitar 1 tahun lah, kita kini berada di bulan Disember, dia punya pergerakan itu menunjukkan menaik itu menunjukkan kadar ataupun ringgit itu melemah kalau dalam peringkat setahun inilah. Kalau kita tengok dalam jangka masa seminggu, kalau dalam jangka masa seminggu pada 12, 13, 14 dan pada hari ini pada jam 9.50 hari ini ia menunjukkan sedikit peningkatan bermula pada 12 hari bulan, sedikit peningkatan ataupun ringgit itu melemah, kemudian ia terus jatuh mendadak pada 14 hari bulan, ia menunjukkan ringgit itu mengukuh dan seterusnya menunjukkan mendatar, garisan yang mendatar sehinggalah hari ini ia menunjukkan sedikit peningkatan setakat jam 9.50 hari ini dan ringgit ditutup tinggi berbanding dolar US pada Jumaat berikutan keputusan terkini Jawatan Kuasa Pasaran Terbuka Persekutuan FOMC minggu lepas. Pada 6 petang, ringgit naik kepada 4.6675 atau 6720 berbanding dolar US daripada 4.6695 6745 ketika ditutup pada Khamis.
Tambahnya memandangkan China adalah destinasi ekspor terbesar Malaysia, sebarang rangsangan kepada ekonomi domestiknya secara teorinya akan meningkatkan ekspor Malaysia. Ines berkata penerimaan pelabur serantau terhadap pakej rangsangan China itu akan membantu prestasi ringgit pada minggu ini. Sementara itu, Jawatan Kuasa Pasaran Terbuka Amerika Syarikat FOMC memilih untuk mengekalkan kadar faedahnya pada 5.25 hingga 5.50% susulan daripada mesyuarat terbaharunya. Sementara itu, Ketua Ekonomi Bank Muamalat Malaysia Dr. Muhammad Afzal Nizam Abdul Rashid percaya ringgit mungkin berusaha untuk melepasi para sokongan segera pada 4.6611 ringgit minggu apabila Fed dijangka menurunkan kadar faedahnya tahun depan. Beliau berkata tumpuan utama sekarang adalah terhadap yen Jepun apabila mengikut tinjauan Reuters Bank of Japan BOJ dijangka tidak akan meneruskan dasar moneterinya yang longgar pada Januari tahun depan. Mesyuarat dasar moneteri BOJ pada 19 Disember akan dipantau dengan teliti kerana peserta pasaran sedang mencari petunjuk mengenai kemungkinan negara itu tidak lagi meneruskan dasar moneteri yang longgar. Beliau berkata sejak 15 November, ringgit menyusut berbanding yen sebanyak 6.4% kepada 3.2868 ringgit setiap 100 yen.
Baik, kita akan teruskan dengan perkembangan Bursa Malaysia. Kontrak niaga hadapan FTSE Bursa Malaysia KLCI atau FBM KLCI di Bursa Malaysia Derivatives dijangka diniagakan dalam julat 1455 hingga 1475 minggu ini seiring dengan momentum menaik pasaran tunai dalam tempoh terdekat. Naib Presiden Pendidikan Ekuiti Rakuten Trade Tong Pak Leng berkata di peringkat domestik, beliau positif terhadap pemangkin dan sentimen global yang semakin baik. Tambahnya, jika FBM KLCI melepasi paras rintangan 1465, mereka meramalkan potensi menaik tambahan, justru jangkaan indeks penanda aras itu akan berada dalam aliran julat 1455 hingga 1475 minggu depan dengan sokongan serta-merta pada 1450 diikuti 1440. Jumlah dagangan mingguan susut kepada 33,100 lot daripada 35,279 minggu sebelumnya, manakala kepentingan terbuka meningkat kepada 44,842 kontrak daripada 40,764 kontrak sebelumnya. Bagi asas Jumaat kepada Jumaat, FBM KLCI meningkat 20.28 mata untuk mengakhiri minggu lalu pada 1462.25 berbanding 1441.97 seminggu yang lepas. Jadi kita nak melihat pergerakan bursa untuk hari ini, ia setakat jam 9.38 pagi ini ia berada pada paras 1461.43 dan ia menunjukkan penurunan sebanyak 0.07% ataupun 1.02 mata. Kalau kita dapat lihat dalam jangka masa seminggu ataupun 5 hari, penurunan ataupun pergerakannya menunjukkan peningkatan berbanding pada Selasa, Rabu, Khamis dan juga Jumaat. Jadi hari ini setakat jam 9.54 pagi ini yang menunjukkan pada paras 1461.28. Jadi sekian saja yang dapat saya kongsikan untuk hari ini dalam Niaga AWANI. Kita jumpa lagi dalam masa akan datang. Saya Nabilah Khaleeda. Salam hormat.
Asia tumpuan utama dunia. Dengan ekonomi yang semakin rancak, pembangunan lestari dan tenaga boleh diperbaharui, apakah pula impak kecerdasan buatan AI dalam perkembangan teknologi dan masa depan pekerjaan? Kami mendalami setiap berita dan cerita. Saksikan diskusi, dialog dan laporan khas di Agenda AWANI Asia bersama koresponden khas kami setiap Sabtu 9 malam di semua platform Astro AWANI.
Tahniah kepada Jacqueline Victor dan finalis All Stars Gegavaganza di atas persembahan yang menakjubkan. Alami pengalaman yang luar biasa ini
meaningfully with climate anxiety. Lots of concepts in that title. My name is Fernando Gomez. I'm part of the Center of Nature and Climate here at the World Economic Forum, and incredibly honored to welcome today a conversation, an illustration of what we see as an emerging and incredibly important issue, bridging two areas of equally high importance. Before we get started, I would love to ask all of you, I cannot do it with all of you who are joining us virtually, but those of you who are here in the room, just a show of hands, who cares about climate change? That's 100%. What about mental health? That's almost 100%. So if you care about these two topics, this is the right place to be, because the next 30 minutes we're going to be looking at the intersection of those two very important areas. I'm very privileged to welcome Dr. Britt Ray, who is the director of a special initiative of the chair on climate change and mental health in the Department of Psychiatry and Behavioral Sciences and the School of Medicine of Stanford University. Dr. Ray is an author, a professor, a researcher in this area, and I hope you are just as excited as I am to learn over the next 30 minutes how to, that is the title of this, how to live with anxiety and climate change. So, Britt, please join me here.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you all. I thought that we could get warmed up together in this session with a bit of imagery. Do you remember when this happened a few years ago and the skies turned orange in San Francisco from wildfire smoke? A similar phenomenon happened recently in New York City when smoke from tons of Canadian wildfires rolled over, choked the sky, and actors on Broadway had to stop performing because it was getting too hard to breathe. Now, eerie events like this are disturbing reminders that our activities are breaking the climatic and ecological conditions that allowed civilization to evolve and thrive, which, when you give it space to really land in your heart, is a deeply distressing thought. And so today we're going to explore the often ignored mental health emergency within the climate crisis that will distress and traumatize billions of people if leaders do not make deep-seated changes to how the mental health of their populations is protected and promoted faster and more effectively than has ever been done before. And so I'd like to just get a quick show of hands. How many of you have ever lost sleep worrying about the climate crisis, maybe what it means for your life or for your children? Yeah. How about a pang of grief for the up to 1 million species that scientists tell us that we are pushing to extinction by the end of the century? So I've certainly felt these things too. And they're valid, appropriate emotional responses to the troubled state of the world. And yes, they can drive distress, but they can also be harnessed for meaningful and courageous climate action if we're thoughtful about how we approach this moment. Because the climate crisis affects mental health through multiple pathways. There's the direct stressors, typhoons, hurricanes, wildfires, droughts, and the interruptions that these cause to necessities like food and shelter and work, which can drive clinical anxiety and depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, substance abuse, and suicidality. And then there's a really well-known link between extreme heat and violent behavior and suicides as well. On these heat wave days that we keep having, the hospital admission rates for self-harm tend to increase. And we know that the psychological impacts of disaster outweigh the physical impacts about 40 to 1. Then there's physical health, and climate change makes us sick, full stop. It affects air quality, nutrition, the spread of vector-borne diseases, and more. And as we get physically sicker, our mental health tends to suffer too. So for instance, asthma, made worse by the burning of fossil fuels that pollute the air, is associated with an increased risk of anxiety and depression. And then there is the bad news about the climate crisis all around us all the time, which is stoking mental and emotional distress. But we're not all equally vulnerable. Those hit hardest and first include children and young people, women, people on the front lines of disaster who are disproportionately located in the global south, those who can't evacuate quickly, which endangers the elderly and people living with disabilities, and poor people. Now, those living with pre-existing mental illness are 2 to 3 times more likely to die in a heat wave. And there's people who are living in intimate relationship with quickly changing landscapes like ranchers and farmers and indigenous peoples worldwide who are specifically vulnerable to these threats. And then there's the frontline climate professionals, the climate scientists, the climate activists, the climate journalists, and green policymakers, some of whom for which experience a crushing psychological toll by studiously bearing witness to the breakdown of a safe climate in their day jobs. And so it's not just that the climate crisis threatens life and livelihood and therefore our mental health, it's also that as these events traumatize individuals and overwhelm our communities and stress our health systems, our ability to protect the climate by transforming the complex systems in which we're living gets thwarted, because how battered we feel determines how well we can build a new world. And if we get entrapped in a spiral of spiritual, emotional, and psychological crises, we can really only focus so much on getting through the day, let alone doing all this massive work we know that we're here to do in the transition. So it's a vicious cycle, and we need to think and act differently. So in recent years, new terminology has emerged to describe people's emotional changing response to our shifting world, like solastalgia. This is the term that describes the feeling of homesickness when you're still at home after so much negative environmental change has happened there that you can no longer recognize it as home and access the solace that it used to give you. Perhaps you've heard of climate anxiety. This is a popular, widely used, but rather imprecise term to talk about a mix of negative emotion, worry, terror, dread about the climate crisis. And despite the clinical sounding name, researchers and clinicians have rallied to argue that climate anxiety is not a pathology and we shouldn't treat it as an illness as though it's some kind of psychological, psychiatric problem within an individual, when what we're dealing with is really a symptom of external sources of danger that affect the whole population. So there's an appropriateness and a rationality to feeling some anxiety about this problem. And this is why it's also been suggested that perhaps we should think of climate anxiety as climate compassion instead, a sign that we are awake to reality and that we care for everything that is in harm's way. But it gets complicated rather quickly. So in the literature, we see climate anxiety paired with pro-environmental behavior, climate activism again and again, because it can really startle a person, get them to wake up and look around and then reassess how boldly they're taking climate action. Greta Thunberg, for instance, went through an intense period of climate despair and anxiety and depression before launching a global movement of students striking for climate action. But if a person isn't supported, it can threaten mental health so much that it impairs functioning. And it's been associated with sleep problems, panic attacks, eating disorders, and suicidal thoughts and behavior. And if you think that I'm exaggerating, just listen to these statistics. So in order to understand the psychological impacts of the climate crisis on young people around the world, my colleagues and I surveyed 10,000 16 to 25-year-olds in 10 countries. We were looking across places like India, Nigeria, the Philippines, Brazil, Finland, France, Australia, the US. And we were alarmed by what we found. 45% of youth globally say that their thoughts and feelings about the climate crisis are interfering with daily life tasks such as eating, sleeping, concentrating. And this rose to 70% in the global south countries. And on the whole, 75% of young people say that the future is frightening to them because of the climate crisis. 56% endorsed the statement that humanity is doomed. And 39% said that they are hesitant to have their own children one day because of the climate crisis. Okay, in a different study, this time of an American sample, we found that youth who had been exposed to at least one climate event were significantly more likely to factor climate change into their future plans around things like what kind of education to get and travel aspirations, as they feel that they must go visit places before they expect they're going to disappear. And again, thoughts about whether or not to have a child or children. And in a different study yet, this time in adults across Japan, India, China, and the US, researchers found that China and India had the highest rates of climate anxiety, and that more than 20% in China and 30% in India experience functionally impairing climate anxiety at least as often as sometimes or frequently. So I'll be honest with you that the reason why I even do this research now is because there was a time when I myself was so stressed out about the climate crisis that internal peace was rather scant. And at that time, I was working as a science communicator, and climate reports were coming across my desk every day, and I felt like I was just kind of staring into the abyss of this difficult data, and then I would come home, and my partner and I would talk about trying to get pregnant. But looking at the warming projections and ineffective action to flatten the curve, and the disasters ramping up, and then just seeing what this is all leading to, I experienced this question as a disturbing and tormenting dilemma. And to my surprise, it actually unleashed cascades of grief and anger and anxiety about the state of the crisis. And it started impacting my ability to concentrate and affecting my relationships. And I felt like I was going crazy. But then pretty quickly, a variety of reports, statistics, and campaigns emerged to show me how commonly felt the sentiment was around the world, including the No Future, No Children pledge, which was created by Canadian undergraduate students and was signed onto by more than 10,000 youth around the world to declare that they are refusing to reproduce until governments make it safe for them to do so with adequate climate action. Okay, so the rise of this sentiment and how quickly it was emerging, particularly in the West, was captured in a recent documentary called The Climate Baby Dilemma, and we can just watch a couple seconds in a clip.
When I first started questioning what it meant to have a child in an increasingly dire climate crisis scenario, I felt very deviant for even asking the question. Then you had celebrities like Miley Cyrus to politicians making statements.
There's scientific consensus, and it does lead, I think, young people to have a legitimate question.
Clearly, it is a luxury to dread the future when so many who've been marginalized already acutely fear the present and need psychosocial support to deal with the disasters on their doorstep. However, climate anxiety and the rise of it everywhere is also a catalyst for privileged people who haven't felt unsafe before to develop new bridges of solidarity with the most climate-impacted communities. And just to close the loop on this, I did end up having a child. I'm very glad that I did. And it's not because my climate anxiety magically went away. It's because I learned to respect the anxiety, because we should not be at peace with the way that things are. And it's, over time, helped navigate me to a new career where I can now work on mental health innovations with directly impacted communities in Stanford's medical school. So at this late stage in our failed efforts to globally solve the climate crisis, climate anxiety, I'd like to propose it as a painful but necessary growth edge and really powerful rocket fuel out there for meaningful purpose and change. So the good news is that there's a ton that we can do to protect and promote mental health in our warming world. So by focusing on practices and policies that are co-benefiting and have win-win solutions for both problems at once, we can really unlock a cascade of mental health protections that also support climate mitigation and adaptation. And if there's one thing that I hope I can leave you with today, it's that if we massively ramp up our investments in a public health approach to rising climate mental health challenges, we'll not only prevent a lot of trauma that will otherwise come, but will support resilience in communities that help to mitigate warming. So the ability of people in a region to come together and coordinate their efforts to achieve shared goals is what's known as social capital. And we have a lot of good disaster psychiatry research to show us that those with high social capital and connectedness in the aftermath of disaster develop far lower rates of mental illness than those who have low social capital. In one study of cyclones that ripped through an Australian town and took the roofs off of children's homes, the kids in the local school who had the most social trust and connectedness, others in their lives that they could go to, developed far lower post-traumatic stress disorder than the kids in the school who are more socially isolated and lonely. And so in a climate context, social capital, connectedness, cohesion, trust, this can be fostered by bringing communities together to work on environmental problems that they care about in the places where they live, because it's through the process of doing something like, let's say, figuring out how to implement a tree planting program in urban heat islands that protect residents from heat, especially on extremely hot heat wave days, and give them access to nature, which is good for mental health, but also absorb carbon dioxide from the system. You learn how to lead and follow and trust each other such that when the disasters do come rolling through, your protective social infrastructure is already there in place. And it needs to be there ahead of time. It can't just come after in order to have that reduction of trauma and mental illness. So this sounds easy, and it is in the sense that this is us doing what we do. We're humans, we're relational human beings, we want to love and be liked and get along. However, at this time, there are more humans living alone than ever in history. And loneliness has emerged as a public health epidemic in many countries around the world. So this trend of social isolation and loneliness is working against our efforts to prevent trauma, and we need to help people increase their social cohesion. And then there's the fact that some traumas aren't going to be prevented. We're going to need to respond. However, as we saw with COVID, right? Mental health needs of populations is not being met by many nations around the world. There just aren't enough clinicians. And also in many low resource settings, the infrastructure is just missing. But here, too, we have solutions to get beyond the fact that the one-on-one narrow biomedical model is falling short. So in global mental health, we've seen that you can take specialists away from being care providers and you turn them into trainers, and then they train lay leaders on the ground who go out into their community and help their neighbors with these interventions that they've been equipped with that have been stripped of their jargon and simplified. And then they can help people with things like anxiety and depression. And clinical trials have shown that this task-shifting approach, as it's called, can be even more effective at helping people heal and recover than primary care. So when we're thinking about the solutions toolkit that we can invest in now and spread and scale to the scope of the problem, we can remember that trauma prevention looks like doing a favor and working with your neighbors. And then adequate care and response looks like peer sharing for scalable caring. And of course, the main intervention for mental health that will prevent these problems from spreading is serious structural change and quitting our addiction to fossil fuels. But while we're still struggling to do that in ways that are fair and just, we can help ourselves by identifying and amplifying the protective factors that build resilience in the places where we live and as we go throughout our days. So resilience building protecting factors are all the things that help us be with suffering that's out there in the world and the suffering that is in our lives, and not be indifferent to it, and generate at the same time enough happiness and joy that we can live lives of service, service to other people, service to Mother Earth, and cultivate meaning and purpose, which protects our well-being from those actions. So this can look like emotional self-regulation skills that you can practice with mindfulness and spiritual practices and drawing strength from one's ancestors and going beyond black and white cognitions to have flexible thinking that helps us keep things in perspective, and self-efficacy, the deep belief that our actions, no matter how small, really do matter. And forest bathing, this intentional practice of going into nature for ecotherapeutic effect, which is linked to restored attention and decreased anxiety and depression. And for some of the most climate anxious youth around the world today, we need to help them access a growth mindset. So this is what psychologists talk about when we can shift from seeing adversities as direct threats to opportunities, opportunities to practice new things, to play, to try out new ways of being with other people, to learn and to grow, because this breeds a sense of possibility and purpose and active hope. So to meet this rising distress, a plethora of resources have gotten off the ground in recent years, like climate cafes. This is a decentralized network of meetings where people can have frank conversations in a validating setting. It's happening all over the world to discuss how the climate crisis is making them feel, why that is, and what they can do about it. There's climate-aware therapy now, too. You can find this in Climate Psychology Alliances, Climate Psychiatry Alliance, where clinicians take a non-pathologizing approach to their mental health care. And then there's peer support programs, a beacon of which is the Good Grief Network. These folks offer a 10-step program that allow people to soothe their climate anxiety in community and then find ways to reinvest the energy they've lost from being stressed out into actions that matter to them and that are purposeful at this time. And anyone can be trained as a facilitator of this program, which is already being used in 16 countries. So my team and I at Stanford School of Medicine are accelerating a movement that centers a public health approach to rising mental health challenges by researching and implementing community-minded healing interventions that build resilience across connected networks of communities, and training clinicians on their important role within these community interventions. And in order to unleash a suite of mental health tools that could really touch everyone in a population rather than just focus on ill individuals, we need to build new and powerful infrastructure to get the job done. And we are looking for partners who believe in this mission and vision and want to help shape it. And we hope that you will join us. The climate crisis, it's anthropogenic, right? We hear that all the time. It's caused by human behavior. And yet, where have the behavioralists been at the decision-making table for all these years as we've been talking about gigatons and graphs and carbon taxes and technologies, and look at where we are. The time to tap into behavior science, to psychology, has come, yes, to help populations make better decisions that are more sustainable, and also to create a more effective ground game of community organizing that's built off of shared grievances. Because that's the only thing that's ever allowed people to come together and work together across their differences and fragmentation to build a better world. Because when we're talking about what you're losing, and what they're losing, and what I'm losing, and what that feels like, and how that keeps us up at night, we can tap into a shared emotive landscape that at some level, everyone is feeling. Because how we live, how we work, what young people's families look like, all this is destabilizing in the climate crisis, and it can drive illness and distress and despair. But it's exactly at this locus of emotion that the global community needs to meet to unlock power and solidarity for meaningful change that can drive us towards the appropriate emergency response. And so I would like to conclude with a quote from researchers who put the value of climate distress really eloquently in the medical journal The Lancet when they write, recognizing that emotions are often what leads people to act, it is possible that feelings of ecological anxiety and grief, although uncomfortable, are in fact the crucible through which humanity must pass to harness the energy and conviction that are needed for the life-saving changes now required. Thank you so much, and if there's any questions, I'd love to take them. Yes. Oh, I think there's a mic coming.
Regarding the intersection between the sort of mental effects of climate anxiety versus the physical effects of climate anxiety, how do you sort of think about that equilibrium, and I guess how to manage it equally and you know, push forwards?
Well, they're both equally important, right? Because functional impairment can be cognitive, but it can also be physical and somatic. Emotions can trip us up. It looks like the most functionally impairing aspects can impede behaviors in climate anxiety, and so we need to pay attention to that. But this is why we need a suite of tools. There's no one silver bullet here, right? We need supportive communities that help preserve well-being so that people can access resources that are going to work for them based on what their triggers are. Maybe it needs to be generative somatics and mindfulness practices that work with regulating the nervous system. Maybe it needs to be more existential approaches about building robust hope and courage to take on the climate crisis and not fall into a deep crevice of despair that entraps one in a sense of fatalism, which is also a sentiment that's spreading out there. So I think the answer is all of the above need to be paid attention to, and we need to tap on especially the wisdom of communities who have long understood what it means to live on the knife's edge of existential threat and have found ways of banding together and fighting for a better future and instilling, you know, difficult situations with ways of improving health and supporting the next generation and essentially maintaining mental robustness so that it's not the sky is falling mentality, but it's actually looking to history for strength about how we've gotten through turbulent times before and can apply that to the situation now. Okay, I think we had a question here and then we'll go over there.
Thank you so much. It's very interesting. I just want to learn from you and Stanford scientists about how you guys are measuring climate anxiety, right? Are you using sensor to measure that or survey-based, you know, given that there's a lot of bias in questionnaire-based surveys?
Yeah, so we have psychometrically validated scales. So these are standardized scales that go out and you can use in different populations to compare results about different cognitive and emotional and behavioral aspects of climate anxiety and how it can show up in a person's life. The field is still pretty nascent. It's only been around a few years, and so people are still like having those academic fights about what exactly the right metrics are to be measuring this construct, but they exist. They're being reproduced and unfolded largely through psychological surveys so far, but I think think it's moving in a direction of collaboration with neuroscientists to also get inside. Yeah. Yes.
So my name is Rana Dajani. I'm a professor of molecular biology from Jordan. One thing, I have two questions. One is, how do you, in order for the humanity to respond to climate change and take responsibility, you need to address the masses, not just a few groups here and there. And the masses usually adhere to a particular faith or religion. And yet religion and faith is really not brought up in these conversations as if it's a taboo. And I know the WHO doesn't even mention it, yet we know. I come from the Muslim faith, which is 1.7 billion people, and there's a Christian faith, and there's Hindu and Buddhism. So how are you integrating the concept of faith and religion so that people can draw from those traditions habits and practices? For example, in Islam, we take care of earth. We are the guardians of earth. We do ritual practices for mental health when we pray 5 times a day, which is the alone time, or when we pray in a group. So these are practices, rather than introducing something new, people will adapt them once you invoke that this is already part of what you do. And when you do it, you're actually helping. And so you're actually harnessing that potential. So that's one. The second question, which is the tools that you just mentioned, the psychometric tools that you're using to measure people's response to anxiety for climate. As a molecular biologist, I'm always very skeptical of surveys to really capture human behavior. So there are a few new methods, and I don't know if you're applying them, which is using fuzzy cognitive mapping, so that you can really map not just the person, but the relationship of that person with the other people in their world, in their ecosystem, and the strengths of those relationships, so that you really understand what is going on in that community, because as you said, we don't live as an individual. So I'd appreciate your remarks on those.
Wonderful, thank you. So on the point of religion, you're absolutely right. And spirituality, religion, culturally traditional practices that give people a sense of identity and belonging, and that work with the resilience stores that they already have, are absolutely key here. And those belong in those slides about protective factors that I mentioned, and being able to really harness that and bring that out. So working with faith leaders is absolutely key. I think the climate movement has not done enough of it. We need to work together across our fragmentation by going to the homes of deeply authentic community where people already are, which means working with faith leaders. And you know, the Pope has already done some incredible work on this with Laudato Si, for instance, the publication he released on climate action from a spiritual perspective. And hopefully we will be seeing more spiritual leaders bringing this up in their communities. But I am very excited about doing these community-minded healing interventions, specifically in religious spaces, for exactly that reason. Now, on the point of measurement, so yeah, there's lots of good reasons to be skeptical of self-report surveys and how accurate the data is. It's a start. It's a good place to get snapshots. We need longitudinal data. We're starting to capture that now. And this functional network mapping that you're talking about sounds like a very useful tool. Additionally, we also need robust qualitative data, because this is human experience that we need to capture in order to refine the tools. So right now what we're doing is we're building a global research and action agenda with partners all around the world in this project with the Wellcome Trust by creating 7 regional hubs, dividing the world into these 7 regions, and then working with committees of Indigenous peoples, youth, farmers, other directly affected populations to then identify and lift up the stories of lived experience of people who are suffering with climate mental health challenges, so that that can feed into a repository globally that drives funding agendas and helps researchers understand exactly ways to locate the research questions to have the best impact for the affected communities. So these things are happening, but again, we think that it needs to be a mixed method approach. And it's all pretty new, so if you have ideas, please do feed in. We're hungry for them. Yes.
So I have a question more on next steps. You mentioned that the largest portion of the population that is heavily impacted is youth. You said it was also very nascent. Are the next steps to start working with ministries of education, ministries of health, and some of the countries that you mentioned have the highest levels of climate anxiety amongst those people? Yeah, absolutely. And climate education programs are a key source of bringing in psychosocial support and socio-emotional learning to deal with the distress that we're seeing in youth. Essentially, what's happening right now is that environmental educators around the world
are showing up to class and they're just doing their job of teaching about the global environmental threats. And then they have classrooms of despairing students who are feeling futureless. And they're saying, oh my goodness, I'm just doing my job, but I'm actually now being a therapist in my office hours for my students rather than helping them on their exams because they need a shoulder to cry on. And I don't want to worsen this intense emotional response. So what do? And the problem is there's been no place for emotions in the climate and environmental sciences. It's like leaving an elephant in the room around what kids are learning, which makes the heaviness harder for them to manage. So we need trauma-informed learning modules to help bring in supportive, active hope, collective, and self-efficacy approaches, and also just emotional regulation tools to help with this. But we need to do it in culturally sensitive ways. So working with ministries, absolutely. Working with nations on their climate adaptation and strategies to be able to do this piece with education is a place that a lot of people in the field are looking. I saw that the questions, I'm so sorry, time was just called. Thank you so much. I'll be around, so if you'd like to chat, I'd love to take this further. Thanks for coming.
Ikmal, tolong jagakan Mikael untuk Mak ya.
Sebuah janji yang perlu ditunaikan.